In 2022, we celebrate 130 years of HBCU football. On December 27th, 1892, Livingstone and Biddle College, now known as Johnson C. Smith University, played in Salisbury, North Carolina, with Biddle winning 5-0. Over time, HBCU football has evolved. HBCU football's popularity continues to rise. Millions attend games each year and millions more watch on television. The HBCU bands provide some of the top entertainment in the country. Over that time, some of the best players to ever play in the National Football League played at HBCUs. Every Monday through Friday on the HBCU Football Daily Podcast, national radio and television host Donal Ware takes a look at what's happening in HBCU football and talks with coaches, players, administrators, and media about the 2022 season. Make sure you join the conversation on social media by using the hashtag HBCU130. Now, here's your host, Donal Ware.
You've got it locked to the HBCU Football Daily Podcast for today, Thursday, December 1st. I'm Donal Ware. It is already December. Remember, we started this podcast for this year back on July the 18th, and it's already December. We're coming upon the Siac championship game on Saturday in Jackson, Mississippi, between Jackson State and Southern. But on today's HBCU Football Daily Podcast, you know, it's that time of year, and I'm in a giving mood, so I'm going to give my grades to all of the HBCU football teams today. We're going to start with the SIAC, and we've done this for many, many years here on Botched Road. So as we always do, we're going to do this in alphabetical order. And we're going to start with Albany State, who was 7-3 on the season. Gabe Gardenia completed the season. He's now the head football coach at Charleston Southern, where he was once, I believe he was an assistant coach, and I believe he was the offensive coordinator. But Albany State had a pretty good season. You know, quarterback Deontay Banu, I should say. I mean, I think maybe a little bit more was expected from him, and he did some good things. I mean, he completed about 50% of his passes, you know, close to 1,230 yards, 8 touchdowns, 4 interceptions on the season. But the offense wasn't great. And see, the difference last year, when you look at that Albany State team last year, it was an Albany State team that had 6 shutouts on the season. So the offense, I think, was decent, and the defense was good, but not dominant. It wasn't a dominant defense like we saw the year before. So where the offense could have been maybe a little bit, it could have been okay, and the defense was dominant, it would have been went a little bit further. But you look at key losses on the season: 2 Benedict, also 2 Fort Valley State, and Albany State out of postseason this year, out of the SIAC championship, didn't get to defend their championship. Overall, I thought a good season. I gave Albany State a B-. Allen was 1-8 on the season. You know, got some pretty good quarterback play. 11 touchdowns to 3 interceptions on the season, using a couple of quarterbacks, primarily 2 quarterbacks. The defense, however, gave up 381 yards per game. I think one of the bright spots was running back Bo Harrington, 734 yards rushing. He had 4 touchdowns on the season. But Allen only won 1 football game. It was a struggle. But I'm going to tell you, man, I think this is maybe an Allen football team that, you know, we'll see what happens next year. But, you know, 1-8 on the season, I gave Allen an F. Benedict on the season, 11-1. So you're talking about a Benedict team that ran the table during the regular season, won the SIAC championship game. And remember, this is Chennis Berry's 3rd season as the head coach, 2nd on the field. Last year, Benedict went 5-5 after the 2019 season. I don't think Benedict even won a football game. If it won 1 football game, maybe. The quarterback, the primary quarterback, was Eric Phoenix, completed 64% of his passes, 2,025 yards, 15 touchdowns to 6 interceptions. He was solid, but that defense was really, really good. And the defensive player of the year defensive lineman Lubert Denilis. And check this out. 14 sacks on the season, 21 tackles for loss, 4 fumble recoveries, 3 forced fumbles, had 51 tackles, 38 of those solo to lead a dominating defense. Yeah, Benedict couldn't get it done in the playoffs, which I think, I don't want to use the word disappointing. I mean, it was a bit of a surprise, but I think Chennisberry knows what it takes in the playoffs, and he's going to be right back there next year. I gave Benedict an A. Central State 3-7 on the season. No running game to speak of for the Marauders. The quarterback, Brandon Cowles, completed 59% of his passes. He had 15 touchdowns to 8 interceptions. And, you know, the Central State, you know, started the season out decent. Remember that win in the Pro Football Hall of Fame game against Winston-Salem State. But it just didn't go as well as Central State would have liked. Now, a couple of decent wins, 3 wins on the season. I gave the Marauders a D-. Clark Atlanta on the season, 3-7. You look at running back Daquan Kinsey, 824 yards rushing, 5.2 yards per carry. Quarterback play was average, and the defense wasn't good at all this year. I mean, you're giving up 400 yards of offense per game. You're just not going to be able to get it done in that manner. Giving up 33.8 points per game as well. Just not a good season for Clark Atlanta. I gave the Panthers also a D-. Edward Waters was 5-6 on the season. So the Tigers lost 6 of their first 7 games. Had a chance to see them play against A&T, which was an uphill battle for them, losing 45-7, but they showed me some grit in that game. And then ultimately, the Tigers went on to win their last 4 ball games. So on a 4-game winning streak to close out the season going into 2023. Solid running game, a decent passing game for Edward Waters. And I like where Edward Waters is right now, moving into full-time in the SIAC on next year. I gave the Tigers a C-. Fort Valley State on the season was 8-2. So you look at Fort Valley State, losses to Benedict and Savannah State. A big win in that Fountain City Classic over Albany State was an opportunity maybe for Fort Valley State to see some postseason play, but ultimately did not happen for the Wildcats. Solid against the run, and you know, the offense was good because of running back Emmanuel Wilson. I thought he was absolutely phenomenal. I think he's one of the top 5 running backs in all of HBCU football. You look at his numbers, 1,371 yards rushing, 6.6 yards per carry. He had 17 rushing touchdowns. He also had 3 receiving touchdowns on the season. Then you look at the quarterback, Kelvin Durham, completed 61% of his passes, 16 touchdowns to 4 interceptions, almost 2,000 yards passing. Then he had 258 yards rushing with 3 touchdowns. He was first team all SIAC. That was a good Fort Valley State team, as good as you can get without winning a championship and with 2 losses. I gave Fort Valley State a B. Kentucky State, 4-6 on the season. Had some decent wins. And the thing about Kentucky State, with about 3 or 4 games remaining, still was in the hunt for the Eastern Division crown. But I mean, the Western Division crown. But it was just going to be an uphill battle. Tuskegee was playing so well. But I give Kentucky State a little bit of credit. Now, I wrote a grade down, but I didn't really give one because it was a D or C- for Kentucky State. I probably would give the Thoroughbreds probably a D. They had some decent wins, but not enough. So I gave the Thoroughbreds, I'm going to go with the D grade, but he could have easily gone with a C-. Lane was 5-5 on the season. Good mix in terms of the offensive, in terms of running and passing the football. Quarterback Michael Huntley completed 62% of his passes, 16 touchdowns to 7 interceptions, threw for close to 1,700 yards. Lane dropped some games that, Lane was in the mix down the stretch too. Just couldn't pull it out. A respectable, I think, 5-5 season, but probably should have been better, especially the way Lane started the season and the win against Tennessee State. Now, I realized Tennessee State wasn't great. Still, I thought Lane could have probably done a little bit better. I gave Lane a C-. And by the way, wide receiver Jaquez Jones, a beast. 50 receptions, 917 yards, 11 touchdowns, averaged 8.3 yards per catch. And then defensive lineman Andrew Farmer, another first-team All-SIAC guy, 23.5 tackles for loss, 5 sacks, 58 tackles. So some good players, decent play. I gave Lane a C-. Let's keep it moving. Miles, 1-9 on the season, no offense, beat Central State, lost to Tuskegee, played the game of its season, but lost in overtime. Miles didn't have a good season. I gave Miles an F. Morehouse, 1-9. Coach Rich Freeman just didn't have a lot to work with. He and Clark Atlanta parted ways. No offense, no defense. Morehouse gets an F on the season. Savannah State was 5-5, a little bit more expectations, I think, for the Tigers, and didn't live quite up to the expectations, although had some decent wins, particularly down the stretch. I gave Savannah State a C-. And finally, Tuskegee was 8-3 on the season. Reginald Ruffin's first year. He's an excellent coach. Goes from Miles to Tuskegee. Tuskegee rises up. Miles falls back. Tuskegee was in that SIAC championship game. The defense was a bit of an issue this year. But the running back, Torrin Taylor, first team All-SIAC, 804 yards rushing, 6.4 yards per carry. He had 8 touchdowns. Quarterback Bryson Williams, 58% of his passes completed for over 1,400 yards, 12 touchdowns to 6 interceptions. Solid quarterback, and then he had a really good wide receiver in Antonio Meeks, 31 receptions, 692 yards, 6 touchdowns, averaged 23.3 yards per catch. Meeks is a freshman. Also, I thought Tuskegee had a really, really good season. Really, really good season, and I gave the Golden Tigers a B. Your thoughts, hit me up via Twitter at Boxtorow, BOXTOROW. We're going to preview all 4 of the conferences and some other of the teams as we go through the week on Boxtorow and on the HBCU Football Daily Podcast. Don't forget to tell a couple of friends about the HBCU Football Daily Podcast, where you can find us on our website at boxtorow.com, also iHeartMedia.com, or wherever you get your podcasts, as well as you can watch us on the Box to Row YouTube page. We're previewing tomorrow the HBCU National Game of the Week between Southern and Jackson State in the SWAC Championship game. Talk with you then.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the HBCU Football Daily Podcast. You can also listen to the podcast at boxtorow.com, iHeartMedia, or wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to get your HBCU football fix on Box to Row with Donal Ware each weekend on the radio station near you, and on SiriusXM on HBCU, Channel 142, and on ESPNU Radio on SiriusXM, Channel 84. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Box to Row for the latest in HBCU football, and don't forget to tell a friend.